Hello everyone, welcome to my channel.
My dad leaned toward me, his voice low enough for the linen napkins to hear, but not the room. Don't embarrass us. Just eat. He smiled for the waiter, like nothing had happened, while I froze mid-breath, fork suspended between pride and silence. The hum of the restaurant blurred into a single thought, pulsing in my head. He has no idea where he's sitting. I let him keep talking, lecturing about manners, success, appearances, all the things he thought he owned. He didn't know the waiter's smile was for me, or that the man in the black and white photo behind him wasn't a stranger. It was my grandfather, the real owner of this place. So I sat back, let Dad's arrogance fill the air, and waited. In 5 minutes, his confidence would collapse with the sound of a falling fork, and the truth would finally eat him alive. The message came at 3:14 p.m., right between two design deadlines and my third cup of burnt office coffee. Dad, dinner tonight. 7 p.m., Westbury Prime. Dress properly. Me. Okay, who's coming? Dad, your grandfather. Don't make it awkward. Those 4 words, don't make it awkward, had followed me since childhood like a shadow stitched to every family gathering. It meant don't bring up what he said that night, don't remind him he left when things got hard, and above all, don't make him look small. By 6:30, Grandpa was standing outside my apartment building in his old navy blazer, the one with frayed elbows and a faint scent of cedar and rosemary soap. He held a small bouquet of daisies, for the table, he said, and offered me his arm like we were going to prom instead of walking into another performance of The Perfect Family. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of rain and exhaust. Grandpa walked slowly, but every step felt deliberate, measured. You don't have to say much tonight, he murmured. Just let him talk. I usually do, I replied. He chuckled. Then it'll be a short night for you. When we reached Westbury Prime, the city's golden hour had just started. Lights flickered on, reflections dancing on the restaurant's glass facade. The brass sign gleamed beneath the awning, fine dining since 1995. Inside, warmth rushed over us. Low jazz, polished wood, the quiet rhythm of silverware against porcelain. The hostess looked up from her stand, recognition softening her features. Mr. B, always a pleasure. Her eyes darted to me, amused. Your usual booth is open, Grandpa winked. Perfect. My granddaughter's hungry. Before I could thank her, a familiar voice cut through the hum. Reservation for Victor Brown, Dad announced, crisp and loud enough for half the room to hear. Party of 3. He didn't notice the hostess's hesitation, or the flicker of surprise on her face. He was too busy adjusting his tie, projecting that curated confidence that always made people assume he was in control. Right this way, she said, guiding us toward a booth by the window, the one beneath the framed black and white photo of a man cutting a ribbon with garden shears. Dad didn't glance at the photo. He never did. As we sat, he launched straight into instructions, as if our lives were a job interview he'd prepared for. Anley, when the waiter comes, don't order anything complicated. Grandpa, maybe just water tonight, all right? Grandpa smiled politely, folding his hands. I'll have a glass of red. It helps me remember the good years. Dad's jaw twitched. We're not here to reminisce, Dad. Let's just enjoy dinner. I caught the hostess's eye again. She gave me the smallest grin before disappearing toward the kitchen. She knew. Everyone who mattered here did. Dad didn't notice. He was already talking about interest rates, promotions, and knowing the right people. His voice filled the air like perfume, pleasant at first, then heavy enough to choke. And I sat back, quietly counting the minutes. In less than an hour, that voice would crack, that confidence would crumble, and the room he thought he ruled would remind him whose name was really written on the walls. Dinner hadn't even started, and I could already feel the tension tightening like a violin string. Dad straightened the cutlery the moment we sat down, aligning each fork with the precision of a man who'd rather control steel than emotions. Anley, salad fork on the outside. Napkin on your lap, he instructed, without looking up. I think I can handle dinner, Dad. He sighed. That heavy kind of sigh meant to remind me I was still his child, even at 27. Grandpa chuckled softly, watching the candlelight dance on his glass of water. Let her eat, Victor. She doesn't need a manual. She does, Dad replied quickly. You can't build a reputation if you can't hold a fork right. The waiter arrived. Marcus, mid-20s, kind eyes, polite confidence. I'd met him before during one of Grandpa's Tuesday visits. He smiled as soon as he saw us. Good evening, Mr. B, he greeted warmly. It's nice to see you again. Dad looked up, startled. You know him? Marcus nodded. Of course, sir. Mr. B is one of our most loyal guests. Grandpa winked at me, but said nothing. Dad forced a laugh, though his knuckles had turned pale around the stem of his wine glass. Oh, I see. He probably comes here a lot, talks with the staff. My father loves people, especially when they listen. The waiter hesitated. Actually, sir, Mr. B doesn't come through the front, usually from the side entrance. That caught Dad off guard. His voice lowered, controlled but sharp. Side entrance? Why would he? I cut in, smiling politely. It's easier on his knees, Dad. The front steps are steep. Marcus nodded quickly. Exactly. The kitchen corridor is shorter. He disappeared before the tension could thicken further. Dad leaned closer to me. Don't interrupt me again when I'm asking a question. I wasn't interrupting. I was saving you from sounding rude. His nostrils flared slightly, but he stayed silent out of pride, not peace. The menu between us might as well have been a battlefield. I watched his eyes scan prices first, not dishes. He always did. Money wasn't something he loved, it was something he wore, like cologne. Let's order something reasonable, he said, closing the menu. The chicken's fine. Simple. I'll have the ribeye, Grandpa said easily. Dad frowned. That's $36, Dad. Grandpa shrugged. I've paid more for worse advice. I almost choked on my water, trying not to laugh. The table fell silent for a moment, and then Grandpa started humming a tune. Old, slow, and a little haunting. Still humming that? I teased. You used to play it in the kitchen. Dad frowned again. What kitchen? Grandpa looked at him, eyes soft. The one that built your life. Before Dad could reply, the manager, Tony, passed by and clapped Grandpa lightly on the shoulder. Evening, Mr. B. Always good to see you. Good to see you too, Tony, Grandpa replied warmly. Dad blinked. You two know each other too? Tony smiled. Of course. Mr. B checks on us every Tuesday. Dad's face froze in polite confusion. Checks? On you? Tony nodded, oblivious to the storm gathering behind that perfect smile. He's the best kind of owner, one who still tastes the soup. And there it was. The first real crack in Dad's polished mask. I caught his reflection in the window, his smile stiff, his eyes darting, his hand gripping the edge of the table like it might float away. The waiter approached again, ready to take our order, but Dad wasn't listening anymore. For the first time all night, he was silent. And in that silence, I could almost hear the sound of everything he thought he knew beginning to fall apart. For a man who always had the last word, Dad suddenly didn't seem to know where to start. He cleared his throat, adjusted his napkin, then checked his phone, anything to fill the air between him and the truth hovering just inches away. Tony disappeared into the kitchen. The moment he left, Dad leaned forward. What did he mean by owner? His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that trembles underneath. Grandpa smiled gently. You heard him. I did. I just don't believe it. Belief's optional, Grandpa said. Dinner's not. Dad laughed, but it sounded brittle. This is some kind of joke, right? You come here, everyone calls you Mr. B, and suddenly you're the secret boss? Not suddenly, Grandpa replied. It's been 30 years. I sipped my water, hiding a grin behind the glass. Marcus passed by, setting down a bread basket. Here you go. Mr. B, fresh from the oven, just like you like it. Dad's eyes snapped to him. Excuse me, do you always talk to customers like that? Marcus froze. Sir? Calling him Mr. B like your old friends. Marcus looked between us, then at Grandpa. Everyone here calls him that, sir. Dad's expression stiffened. Right. Of course. Grandpa tore a piece of bread, slow and easy. Good batch tonight, he murmured. Yeast's happy. I smiled. You can tell? Yeast doesn't lie, kiddo. Dad exhaled hard through his nose. You two sound insane. He reached for his wine and nearly spilled it. You're telling me this place belongs to you? Grandpa met his gaze steadily. Not just this one, there's 21 more. He said it like he was ordering dessert. No arrogance, no drama, just fact. The fork in Dad's hand trembled. You're kidding. I'm eating, Grandpa said, dipping his bread in olive oil. You're panicking. Marcus returned with a notepad. Are you ready to order, sir? Dad blinked twice before answering. Yes. The chicken. Excellent choice. Marcus turned to me. And you, Miss Brown? The ribeye? I said, eyes locked on Dad's pale face. Grandpa grinned. Same for me. Medium rare, as usual. As usual, Marcus repeated, smiling as he jotted it down. Dad's shoulders twitched. He says, as usual, like you eat here every day. Grandpa shrugged. Not every day. Tuesdays and Fridays mostly, but I prefer the kitchen. Dad's jaw dropped. You've been working here? No, Grandpa said quietly. I've been watching over it. It was like watching glass crack in slow motion. He stared at Grandpa, then at me, then back at the photo on the wall, the same one he'd ignored earlier. That's you, he whispered. That's you in the picture. Grandpa looked up, his voice soft but unshakable. You were there too, Victor. You just forgot. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. For once, Dad didn't have a script, a correction, or a lecture. He just sat there, eyes darting, trying to find the version of reality that didn't make him look small. But in that room, under that photo, surrounded by people who already knew the truth, there was no smaller place left to hide. Dad excused himself halfway through the meal, claiming he needed to wash his hands. I knew better. He needed to breathe. Or maybe unsee what he'd already started to realize. Grandpa didn't look up from his plate. He's going to the hallway, he said, cutting into his steak. How do you know? I asked. Because that's where the ghosts hang their pictures. I followed with my eyes as Dad disappeared toward the restrooms, past the wine display, past the framed awards, and then he stopped. Right beneath the largest frame in the hallway. Even from our booth, I could see it. The black and white photograph, the one I'd always paused to look at as a kid. A man in rolled-up sleeves, holding a pair of garden shears, cutting a ribbon in front of a small brick building with a brand-new sign, Westbury Prime 1000, 995 grand opening. That man was Walter Brown, my grandfather, and right beside him, small and beaming, was a boy with the same sharp nose and uncertain smile as the man now staring at that photo like it was a mirror he hadn't seen in decades. Dad's hand went to the frame as if touching it could change what it showed. The restaurant noise dimmed behind the glass door, replaced by silence and memory. I imagined the moment landing like a hammer in his chest. The man he pitied for being too old to work had built the empire that funded every suit he wore. The same restaurant he'd chosen to flaunt his importance in belonged to the father he'd dismissed as irrelevant. From across the room, I saw his shoulders collapse slightly, not from exhaustion, but realization. When he returned, his complexion had changed. The color had drained from his cheeks, and his once perfect posture had softened. Grandpa looked up, calm as a monk. Find what you were looking for? Dad sat down slowly. That picture, it's you. Grandpa smiled. It used to be. Now it's the business. I thought you were doing construction, Dad muttered. I did, Grandpa said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Brick by brick. Dad rubbed his forehead, forcing a laugh that came out crooked. You could have told me. You could have asked, Grandpa replied. He pushed his empty plate aside. You've always been too busy pretending to build things to notice the one already standing behind you. Marcus approached with dessert menus, but the tension at our table could have melted ice. Would you like to see our specials tonight? He asked carefully. Dad waved him off. No, we're fine. His voice cracked on the word. Marcus nodded politely. All right, Mr. B. Anything else for you? Just a little more time, Grandpa said, smiling at me. Some truths need to finish cooking. Dad looked at him, eyes wide, words failing. You're really the owner. You actually own this place. Grandpa leaned back. Son, I don't own it. I built it. Ownership is just paperwork. Legacy is the part people remember. The lights above us seemed warmer somehow. Softer. For a moment, even the hum of the dining room felt like it had slowed down to listen. Dad picked up his fork again, hands trembling. But when he tried to take a bite, it slipped from his grasp and hit the plate with a sharp metallic ring. That sound hung in the air longer than it should have, an echo of pride cracking in real time. And right then, everyone in the room turned to look. For a moment, the sound of that falling fork felt louder than every voice in the restaurant. Conversations paused, wine glasses hovered midair, and even the jazz from the speakers seemed to fade. Dad reached down quickly, trying to laugh it off. "Butterfingers," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Guess I'm clumsy tonight." No one responded. Not me, not Grandpa, not the waiter standing 2 tables away, who'd seen everything. Then Marcus approached with quiet caution. "Everything all right here, Mr. Brown?" Dad straightened instantly. "Of course. Fine. Just a little accident." Marcus's eyes shifted to Grandpa. "And you, sir?" Grandpa smiled softly. "Never better." It was the calmest smile in the room, and somehow the most dangerous. Dad took a deep breath and leaned forward, voice low. "We're leaving after dessert. I don't want any more of this circus." "What circus?" I asked. "This?" he hissed, gesturing toward the room. "Whatever game he's playing." Grandpa wiped his mouth slowly with his napkin. "It's not a game, Victor. It's dinner." Dad scoffed. "Dinner? You humiliated me in front of—" "I haven't said a word," Grandpa interrupted. "You did that part yourself." His tone wasn't angry, but steady. That made it worse. A few heads had turned toward us now. Curiosity hummed through the air like static. Dad noticed. His pride, cornered, lashed out. He stood up abruptly. "All right. Everyone seems to have a lot of opinions about my family tonight." "Victor," I whispered. "Sit down." "No," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to slice the quiet. "I'm tired of being treated like I'm crazy, like I don't know what's going on." Grandpa said nothing. He just looked at him sadly, like a father watching a son punch shadows. Tony, the general manager, appeared beside Marcus, his presence calm but commanding. "Is everything okay here?" Dad exhaled hard. "You must be Tony. Perfect. You can tell my father to stop lying about owning this place." Tony blinked once, assessing. Then he turned toward Grandpa. "Would you like me to, Mr. B?" The room went silent again. Dad froze. "What did you just call him?" Tony's voice remained even. "Mr. B. Walter Brown, the founder of Westbury Prime." A glass somewhere clinked against a plate. Dad stared at Tony, then at Grandpa, then back at the crowd of strangers who suddenly weren't strangers anymore. "This is insane," he muttered. Though the conviction was gone, Grandpa gestured to Tony. "Would you bring that folder I left in your office?" Tony nodded and disappeared toward the back. Dad turned to me, eyes wide. "You're in on this?" "I didn't plan it," I said quietly, "but I knew." He opened his mouth, then closed it again when Tony returned, carrying a brown leather folder embossed with Brown Family Hospitality. "Everything you asked for, sir," Tony said, placing it on the table like evidence in a trial. Dad's hand twitched, reaching for it. "What is that?" Grandpa smiled faintly. "Receipts, photographs, signatures, proof. But I'd rather you see than read." He flipped open the folder and turned it toward my father. There, in black ink, was the deed. The logo, the first business license, and below the signatures, the founder's name, Walter Brown. Dad's lips parted, but no words came out. His pride had gone quiet. Grandpa tapped the paper lightly. "You see, son, you've spent years trying to build something worth your name. You just forgot your name was already on the door." For the first time that night, Dad didn't argue. He just stared at the documents, at his father, at himself reflected faintly in the glass window beside us, small, shaken, and speechless. And when he finally sat down, the room began to breathe again. But the silence between us had only just begun. For a few endless seconds, the entire restaurant felt like a courtroom, and my father, for once, had nothing to defend himself with. He sat there, motionless, staring at the old papers laid open before him. Under the golden light, the bold black letters, Brown Family Hospitality Group, founder, Walter Brown, looked like a verdict carved in stone. The whispers started spreading softly, like wind through tall grass. "That's his dad? Wait, the old man owns the place? He's the founder?" Dad heard every word. He looked around, face pale, jaw locked tight. His hands hovered above the table like he couldn't decide whether to grab the papers or tear them apart. Finally, he laughed a sharp, broken sound. "So that's it? You bring me here to humiliate me? To make me look like a fool in front of strangers?" Grandpa leaned back, unfazed. "You didn't need my help for that, son." The entire room went still. Even Tony, who'd seen 1,000 awkward dinners, froze mid-step. Dad slammed his palm on the table. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? Owning a bunch of restaurants doesn't make you better than me?" "No," Grandpa said calmly. "Respect does." The words hit harder than any shout could. "You talk about respect," Dad shot back. "But you kept this from me. You let me believe you were broke living off scraps. Why?" Grandpa folded his napkin, aligning the edges perfectly before answering. "Because money doesn't teach character, struggle does. And I wanted to see who you'd be without the inheritance." Dad stared at him, shaking his head. "You wanted to test me? I'm your son, not a project." Grandpa's eyes softened. "You're both." Marcus appeared again, hesitant. "Would you like me to, bring dessert menus?" Grandpa smiled at him. "No need, son. Tonight's lesson's already sweet enough." Marcus nodded and quietly retreated. Dad was trembling now, not with anger anymore, but something worse. Shame. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I just wanted to make you proud, to prove I could do something without your name attached." Grandpa nodded. "And in trying so hard to prove it, you forgot who gave you the name in the first place." Tony cleared his throat softly. "Mr. B, if I may, the transition documents you left in my office, shall we bring them out?" Grandpa looked to me. "Anley, would you mind?" I nodded, standing, taking the second folder Tony held out. Inside were crisp pages stamped and signed. "Transfer of ownership. Pending successor evaluation." Dad looked up, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" Grandpa gestured toward the pages. "It means this empire, these restaurants, these people will be yours someday. But not yet." "What's the condition?" Dad asked cautiously. Grandpa's voice carried across the silent room, low but steady. "1 year. You'll work in my restaurants, starting at the bottom dish pit, prep line, server, host. You'll learn what it takes to keep this running. You'll earn every ounce of respect you once demanded." Dad's face drained of color. "You're serious?" "As the cancer that put this plan on a deadline," Grandpa replied evenly. The words sliced through the air. My chest tightened. I hadn't heard him say it out loud before. Dad blinked rapidly, trying to process what he'd just heard. You're sick?" "Stage 4, Grandpa said simply. 8 weeks left, maybe 12 if the medicine keeps pretending to work." The room went silent again. Even the wait staff stopped pretending not to listen. Dad's voice broke. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to see if you'd notice," Grandpa whispered. "You didn't." A tremor passed through Dad's fingers. He looked at the folder again, then at Grandpa. "And if I refuse your condition?" Grandpa smiled, slow and tired. "Then you'll get what you've already earned, nothing." Tony placed a single pen on the table. The sound of it clicking against the wood echoed like a gavel. Grandpa looked at me. "Witness?" I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. Dad reached for the pen. His hand shook as he signed the first page, "Acceptance of transitional terms." His voice cracked halfway through. "When do I start?" Tony replied softly. "Monday morning. 6 a.m. Bring work shoes." Grandpa's smile returned. Faint, but peaceful. "And, Victor, leave the tie at home. The kitchen doesn't care about your titles." Monday morning came like punishment. Dad showed up at Westbury Prime 5 minutes early, wearing jeans stiff with newness, a plain gray t-shirt, and a pair of sneakers that looked like they'd never touched dirt. Tony met him at the back entrance, the same one Grandpa always used. "Morning, Victor," Tony said, handing him an apron. Dad tried to smile. "Please call me Mr. Brown." Tony shook his head gently. "In the kitchen, we don't do Mr. anything. You're Victor." By noon, Dad looked like a ghost wearing sweat. The heat from the dish station was relentless, the steam clouding his glasses, his hands red from scrubbing pans that weighed more than his pride. He didn't complain, but he didn't talk much either. Carlos, the prep cook, tried to joke with him. "Hey, boss man still think the fork goes on the left?" Dad actually laughed, breathless. I don't even know which side of my body hurts more. When I visited that evening, Tony gave me a small wave. Your dad's learning, he said. He's not fast, but he's trying. I peeked through the service window. There he was, my father, hair damp, apron soaked, quietly stacking plates like they were made of glass and redemption. Every once in a while, he looked up toward the dining room, as if expecting to see Grandpa watching. By week 2, his hands had blisters. By week 4, they'd hardened. He stopped talking about image and started asking about timing, about sauce ratios, about why people tipped more when you looked them in the eye. He learned how to slice onions without tears, at least from the onions. Sometimes, late at night, he'd send me short messages. Dad, did you know the dishwasher drains faster if you tilt the rack? Dad, the cooks call me Mr. Clean now. Think it's a compliment. Dad, Grandpa used to check invoices by hand. Tony showed me his notes. Every number perfect. The man who once lectured waiters about table manners now apologized if he bumped into one. He started showing up early, staying late, wiping down counters that weren't his to clean. One Friday afternoon, I walked in and found him helping Maria, one of the servers, polish silverware. She told me later he'd been covering her shift breaks so she could call her kids. He's not bad for a boss, she said with a grin. He's not the boss yet, I replied. Maybe not, she said, but he's acting like one. Around the 3-month mark, Tony moved him to the line. Time to feel the fire, he said. Dad burned his hand the first night. He didn't swear, he just ran it under cold water and went back to flipping steaks. Something changed after that. He stopped looking at the clock, stopped checking his phone, stopped flinching when someone called him Vic instead of Mr. Brown. One evening, after closing, Tony found him sitting alone by the prep table, staring at the empty dish pit. You okay? Tony asked. Dad nodded slowly. I used to think this work was beneath me. Now I realize it's what's been holding me up. When Grandpa passed by the kitchen later that week, leaning on his cane, the staff clapped spontaneously. They all knew. Grandpa just smiled, walked up to my father, and said, "You smell like effort. That's the best cologne you've ever worn." Dad didn't answer. He just hugged him, something I hadn't seen him do since I was 9 years old. From that night on, Victor Brown wasn't the man who whispered, "Don't embarrass us," anymore. He was the man who said, "Thank you," before every shift. And as the months slipped by 12, then 13, I realized something strange. He wasn't just earning the right to inherit a business. He was earning the right to belong in it. A year later, the world inside Westbury Prime moved differently. The light felt softer, the chatter warmer, the hum of the kitchen steadier, like the restaurant itself could sense a shift in the air. That morning, Tony called me. "Anley, your father's ready," he said. "For what?" "For the keys." I arrived just before lunch rush. The smell of roasted garlic and seared butter wrapped around me like a memory. Grandpa was already there, sitting at our old booth by the window, his cane resting beside him, his expression calm but faintly distant, as if time had already begun to take him somewhere else. Dad stood in his work clothes. Black apron, sleeves rolled, a faint streak of flour across his forearm. His eyes met mine. They were tired, but steady, like someone who'd finally stopped running from himself. Grandpa motioned for us to sit. "It's been 12 months, he said. "How's the dish pit, Victor?" Dad smiled faintly. "Less terrifying than the boardroom," Grandpa chuckled. "And which one taught you more?" "The one with the broken plates." Tony appeared beside our table, carrying a small black box. He set it down gently, the way one sets down a crown. Inside was a brass key, heavy and gleaming, engraved with 3 letters, WBP. Next to it lay a new name pin, V, Brown Floor Manager. Grandpa's eyes softened. "You've earned these." Dad picked up the key with both hands, like it might vanish if he held it wrong. "I don't deserve this." "Finally," Grandpa said, smiling. "You're saying something true." Dad let out a short, broken laugh. "But you do," Grandpa continued. "Because you understand now. The people who sweep the floors, wash the dishes, take the orders, they're the backbone. If you forget them, you lose everything." Dad nodded slowly, emotion catching in his throat. "I forgot that for a long time." "And you remembered it the hard way," Grandpa said softly. That's how remembering works. I reached across the table, placing my hand over both of theirs. He's different now, Grandpa. You'd be proud. Grandpa looked at me and smiled the way he used to when I was little, half joy, half secret. I already am, kiddo. I just needed him to earn the right to be proud of himself first. Tony cleared his throat gently. Mr. Brown, the afternoon crew's waiting for direction. Dad turned to him, almost startled by the title. Mr. Brown, he repeated under his breath. Feels different now, Tony smiled. Because now it means something. Dad stood, taking the name pin from the box and sliding it into place on his apron. Grandpa raised his glass of water. To mistakes, he said. They teach better than success. Dad lifted his, too. And to second chances. I added mine softly. And to family that never stops waiting for you to figure it out. We clinked glasses, 3 quiet taps that sounded more sacred than any toast I'd ever heard. Grandpa leaned back, sighing contentedly. Now, if anyone asks, I retired officially today. Tony smiled. We'll update the records. Don't, Grandpa said. Leave it blank. Let people wonder. Legends need mystery. When the lunch crowd began to arrive, Grandpa pushed his chair back, slow and steady. I'll let you two handle this one, he said. Are you sure? I asked. He smiled. I've been sure for a year. He walked toward the door, cane tapping softly on the polished floor, pausing beneath the photo on the wall, the same one of him cutting the ribbon with a young boy beside him. He looked up at it, then turned to Dad. Looks like the kid finally showed up. Dad's eyes glistened. Took me long enough. Grandpa nodded, a faint glimmer of pride in his tired eyes. Better late than never, son. Then he left quietly, as he'd lived. No fanfare, just the sound of the door closing behind him. Dad watched until he disappeared into the street. Then he turned to Tony. All right, let's get to work. Tony grinned. Yes, sir. And as the kitchen roared back to life, I saw it, the same reflection Grandpa once had. The same steadiness in his hands, the same humble fire in his eyes. Dad had finally become the man Grandpa wanted him to be. Not by inheriting an empire, but by earning the right to hold its keys. Legacy, Grandpa once said, isn't what you leave behind. It's what survives in the people who learn from your mistakes. That night, I finally understood.